There is a city under the city of Mosul. Most people who live above it have no idea. But beneath the streets, beneath the foundations of apartment buildings and markets and mosques, lie the bones of Nineveh, capital of the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. A city that, for 50 years, was the biggest on Earth. And somewhere in those ruins, buried in dust and rubble and 26 centuries of forgetting, is a question that nobody thought to ask for a very long time. Not about the empire, not about the kings, about the people who stayed, because empires fall. We know that. But populations, the actual human beings living inside those empires, they do not simply vanish when the palace burns. Or at least they are not supposed to. And yet for centuries, that is precisely what the world assumed happened to the Assyrians. That when Nineveh fell, the people fell with it. That one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth simply disappeared. They did not. And the proof is not in a textbook or a monument or a diplomatic record. The proof is in their blood. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what Nineveh was. Not just a capital, a statement. At its height in the 7th century BC, the city walls stretched for 13 kilometers. They stood 15 gates tall. Inside, the palace of King Sennacherib contained more rooms than most modern hotels. The library of Ashurbanipal held over 22,000 clay tablets, the largest collection of knowledge anywhere on Earth at that time. The empire those walls protected had swallowed everything in sight, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from the mountains of what is now Turkey to the deserts of Egypt. For 300 years, Assyrian kings ruled more territory than anyone before them had imagined possible. And then, in 612 BC, it ended. The Babylonians came with the Medes and the Scythians. They besieged Nineveh for 3 months. When the walls were finally breached, the fighting moved house to house. Temples were sacked. The palace was burned. The Assyrian king died in the flames. By August of that year, the city that had ruled the known world was, according to the Babylonian Chronicle, turned into mounds and heaps. Archaeologists who later excavated the site found unburied skeletons in the streets. That image, the burning city, the scattered bones, that became the story. Nineveh fell. Assyria ended. The people vanished into the dust of history. For centuries, this was what the textbooks said. It was what the maps implied. It was what felt true, because the empire was so thoroughly dismantled that to the Greek historians writing just 2 centuries later, Nineveh was already a thing of the past. But here is the part that slipped through the cracks of the grand narrative. The empire ended. The people did not. They stayed. In the villages around Nineveh, in the mountain valleys of what is now southeastern Turkey and northwestern Iran and northern Iraq. They kept speaking their language, a form of Aramaic that had begun replacing the old Akkadian tongue even before the empire fell. They kept their customs. And then, within a few generations of the fall, they did something that would quietly seal their survival for the next 2,000 years. They became Christian. Now, I know that sounds like just a religious conversion, but think about what it meant in practical terms. In a region that would soon be swept by Islam, by Arab expansion, by Turkish conquest, by Mongol invasion, being Christian meant being set apart. It meant you worshipped differently, married differently. Married within the community because your faith demanded it and your survival depended on it. Century after century, while empires traded control over their homeland, the Assyrians held to their faith and to each other. They were not rulers anymore. They were not conquerors. They were a small, stateless minority living in the mountains, speaking a language that predated everyone around them, praying in churches built on the ruins of temples that once honored Ishtar. And nobody outside their community paid much attention to them, until the DNA. When geneticists began seriously examining populations of the Middle East, they expected to find what they usually find: mixture. layers of migration and conquest and intermarriage blending everyone together over millennia. The Middle East, after all, has been a crossroads since before recorded history. Every army that marched through left its genetic fingerprint. But the Assyrians did not fit that pattern. Study after study found the same thing. A 2008 analysis of 340 people from 7 different ethnic communities across Mesopotamia found that Assyrians were genetically homogeneous, distinct from every other group sampled, including Arabs, Armenians, Kurds, Jews, Zoroastrians, Mandaeans, and Turkmen. It did not matter which church they belonged to. It did not matter where they lived. The genetic signature was the same. That is not normal. In a region where migration, conquest, and conversion have blended populations for 10,000 years, one group somehow maintained a separate genetic identity. And that brought the scientists face to face with a question that had been hiding in plain sight. Were these people actually who they said they were? Were these small Christian communities, scattered across 4 countries, actually the descendants of the ancient Assyrians? If you are enjoying this and want to see more stories like this one, the subscribe button is right there. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling the stories that do not make it into the headlines. The answer came from a man named Luigi Luca Cavalli Sforza, a geneticist at Stanford who had spent decades mapping the genetic history of every major human population on the planet. His team analyzed data from 491 distinct populations worldwide. They spent 8 years collecting genetic information and several more running the statistical analyses. And when they looked at the Assyrians, their conclusion was striking. They called them a fairly homogeneous group of people, originating from the land of Old Assyria in northern Iraq. They described them as, quite simply, possibly bona fide descendants of their ancient namesakes. I keep coming back to that phrase. Bona fide descendants. What that means, in human terms, is that the bloodline held. Not perfectly, nothing in genetics is perfect. But remarkably, unmistakably, the code that ran through the veins of the people who built Nineveh is still running through the veins of their descendants today. More than 2,600 years after the city burned. And it held not because of isolation in the usual sense, not because of geography or an island or a mountain range too high to cross. It held because of faith. Because Christianity, in this case, functioned as what geneticists call a genetic barrier. The Assyrians married within their community, generation after generation. Not because they were told to by some abstract rule, but because they were surrounded. By Muslim majorities, by Kurdish neighbors, by Arab governments, by Persian authorities. Their faith was the wall. And inside that wall, the DNA barely moved. A separate 2011 study looked at the broader question of Mesopotamian genetic continuity and concluded that Assyrians, along with Mandaeans and Marsh Arabs, carry DNA that is predominantly of Mesopotamian origin. The land they had lived on for millennia had literally written itself into their genetic code. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about every empire that rose and fell around them. The Babylonians, the Persians, Alexander the Great, the Romans, the Parthians, the Sasanians, the Arab conquest, the Mongol invasions, the Ottoman Empire. 2,600 years of invasion, occupation, and upheaval, and the genetic signature of the original population barely shifted. That is not stubbornness. That is something deeper. That is a people who decided, consciously or not, that they would not be erased. And what makes this even more staggering is what they endured to maintain it. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire, alongside allied Kurdish forces, carried out what Assyrians call the Sayfo. The word means sword in Aramaic, because that is what 1915 was, the year of the sword. Entire villages in southeastern Turkey and northwestern Iran were destroyed. Churches were burned with people inside them. An estimated 250,000 to 300,000 Assyrians were killed in the space of a few years, nearly half the population. Before the Sayfo, The Assyrians had lived largely unmoved from their ancestral lands for 5,000 years. 5,000 years in the same valleys, the same mountains, the same river plains. After the genocide, the survivors scattered to Iraq, to Syria, to Europe, to America, to Australia. And still, the DNA held. Today, the worldwide Assyrian population is estimated at between 3 and 5 million. But here is the part that catches in the throat. More Assyrians now live outside their homeland than inside it. They are the only indigenous Middle Eastern Christian group without a sovereign state. They speak Neo-Aramaic, a language that descends directly from the tongue spoken across the ancient Near East. The language tradition holds Jesus himself spoke. And they carry, in their cells, a genetic signature that connects them to the people who founded one of the first great cities on Earth. There is still so much we do not know. The genetic picture, while remarkably consistent, is not complete. Ancient DNA studies are still catching up to what modern populations have shown us. Researchers have reconstructed the genomes of 40 ancient Assyrian individuals from sites across Turkey and Iraq, spanning nearly 2,000 years of Assyrian history. But the full comparison between those ancient genomes and the modern community is ongoing work. There are gaps. There are questions about how much admixture occurred in the centuries between the fall and the rise of Christianity. There are debates about whether certain neighboring groups, Chaldeans, some Kurdish populations, might share equally strong genetic links to ancient Mesopotamia. These are not weaknesses in the story. They are the edges of it, the places where the science is still catching up to the people. But what is not in question is this. A population that the world assumed had been swallowed by history, erased by conquest, dissolved into the nations that replaced them, turns out to have been there the whole time, in the mountains, in the valleys, in the churches, holding on to their language, their customs, and, without knowing it, their ancient genetic identity. In 2015, fighters from the Islamic State entered the Mosul Museum with sledgehammers and destroyed ancient Assyrian artifacts that had stood for nearly 3,000 years. That same year, they bulldozed sections of the ruins of Nineveh itself, the city that once held the world's greatest library. But they could not destroy the people who built it. Not then. Not in 1915. Not in 612 BC. Because the Assyrians were never the empire. The empire was something they built. What they are is something older, something that predates the palaces and the armies and the conquering kings. They are a thread of human continuity that runs from the banks of the Tigris through 2,600 years of fire and exile and forgetting, right into the living rooms of families in Chicago and Sydney and Stockholm who still speak the oldest surviving language in Mesopotamia. The bricks crumble. The blood remembers.